Delighted to introduce hyperexponential, Jamie and Richard, who've been in the news recently, might be talking about that. But Jamie, first of all, to you, if you could introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure
yourself,
thing.
I should say.
Hi all, Jamie Wilson. I'm actually a pricing actuary by background, and for some reason they thought they would put me in front of you to talk. I don't know why. So I actually spent most of my career in-house, working in consulting, in-house, London market, US markets, and joined hyperexponential a year ago, working as head of pricing and innovation. So throughout my career, I'd always been on the kind of the data science, technology, transformation side of things. I got to partner with some really great companies at my time, but now I get to actually be on the tech side of things and see behind the curtain. So that's me.
And you sort of hinted at it in there, but another ex-insurer as well. So
yeah.
It's a bit of a trend getting. And then Richard,
yeah,
tell us about yourself.
Yeah, you might have noticed I'm not Christina Lutz, not during the week anyway. I guess to carry on Nigel's insurance analogy, I'm the insurance cover for today. Unfortunately, Christina was unwell, so I've jumped in, which means we are falling foul, I think, of Nigel's rule of always having a female representative on the panel, but I will do my best, and great to be here. In terms of who I am, I'm the CRO at hyperexponential. I am moving to the US in the next couple of weeks, so spending some time with our existing clients in the US and building a team here as well. Also looking for nurseries and advice on where to move, so all advice welcome in that regard. So pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Nothing like committing to your company to move the whole family over here, Richard, especially when you've got young children. Jamie, before we sort of get into the sort of questions around the sort of insurance relevance questions, it's probably helped us to frame who are HX or hyperexponential. We should say, what is HX Renew? Certainly over in the UK and Europe, I'd say it's quite genuinely barely a day goes by without somebody talking about you, generally in positive ways as well. So what's going on? Then we're going to hear more about your move to the US.
Yeah, it's always good to hear that it's positive. So hyperexponential. So effectively, kind of our origin stories, a couple of computer scientists, come pricing actuaries, again, who like to go out, sit in front of people and talk. We're trying to build pricing tools, get them out into the market, get them in front of underwriters, iterate on them, transform them, and they were stuck with Excel. And they saw a little bit of a gap in the market, and so effectively they kind of quit their day jobs, heading up pricing teams, and went into the market to go and build effectively HX Renew, the kind of hyperexponential product. And what our product does, it effectively allows insurers, pricing actuaries, developers to build user interface, effectively build pricing tools, rating tools at speed, deploy them at speed, get them in front of the underwriters at speed, and then iterate on them. And so we've got, customers. We originated in the London market. We've now got a number of multinational customers, Lloyd's syndicates, reinsurers, MGAs, kind of using the platform to just transform how they do pricing. But yeah.
And also, great news story for you, but actually for many of us, I think, following the space, to see the level of funding you raised earlier this year, $73 million, and also having known your organization since you started, seeing that you built the business what I call the old-fashioned way. So you went out, you got clients, you generated revenue, and then you got funding, and then you can send Richard over to the US. So Richard, sort of building a little bit on Jamie's point, in terms of like why of the business, perhaps you can help us understand, particularly given who's in the room, what are the kind of problems that underwriters came with you or are now coming to you to help solve?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, you should probably qualify it with it depends which type of underwriter comes to you. Not all of them want to be augmented. And one of the big challenges when it comes to kind of solving in this space is less about the technology. Like we've learned today that there's a lot of technology out there which can solve for some really cool and awesome use cases, and a lot of it is around the change management. But let's assume that we've got an underwriter who wants to be augmented. Kind of the challenges we see are likely twofold. So one, we've covered a little bit with Saitoro on stage today, which is if they've got this unstructured submission. And to give a bit more context, we often operate in the commercial and P&C space, so it's rare that there isn't a broker in the loop, or at least it's very rare that you have nice, clean data coming through as a submission that you can have as a straight-through processing. So how can you get that data in to your pricing models very quickly and really actually make sure that you're saving time on the underwriting side? And then it's, once you've solved for that kind of quick win, how can you make sure you're surfacing that up to your underwriters in a valuable way? So we'll find a lot. I'll give a good example. For example, for professional indemnity insurance line, that they would have that submission come in, they'd ingest it into their pricing model, and then they'd look up whether that company is real, who the professional works for. They'd go on Google Maps, they'd find out where they're located. They'd go on StreetEasy or Zoopla in the UK, they'd find out like the risk rating of that local area, and they'll use all of these data points to form their view as the underwriter of the risk. So how can you actually, the pain points we're seeing is they're spending a lot of time bringing in that data. And then lastly is the fact that often they'll do all of that work and it'll come to the renewal and they'll have to do it all again. Or they'll do all of that work and they'll find really hard to learn from that. So one good example will be if you speak to an underwriter and they get a submission in from a broker, for example, and they want to think, actually, what did the last 3, 4, 5 submissions from that broker look like? And normally they have to go into their sent items and look for, like, I sent to, how did I respond to them? What did I look at that risk? And actually, that's a problem that we're looking to solve, is actually how can we surface up some of that information at the point of pricing rather than just solving for the submission, it's then taking it through to making the decision.
I mean, it's funny about you saying that. We spent probably a decade talking about the challenge of spreadsheets. I wonder if the next decade can be talking about the challenges of email and how we sort of wean ourselves off email. Richard, also just on the point of underwriting, as I mentioned before, hyperexponential. You cut your teeth in the UK and now moving to the US. How would you characterize? If I'm trying to keep it simple, the way the US underwriters look at the sort of challenges you mentioned versus what you might have seen in the UK?
That's a very big question. I'm going to start talking about admitted versus non-admitted and E&S, etc. So I'd probably give the consultant's answer. So I started as a consultant, so I fall back to that if under stress and I get asked a good question with a depends. So there's lots of lines which are written very similarly to how they are in the Lloyd's of London market, with a little bit less nuance around reporting, etc. And then once you get into the admitted space, you obviously have all of your filed rates and everything to manage there. We see a lot of common pain points on the submission side and how they manage a risk, how an underwriter will assess the profile of risk, the extent to which they'll be looking at a portfolio basis, further another basis will differ based on where they sit and that kind of plethora of insurance products.
Thanks, and Robin's going to be digging in that a bit later with our panel of insurers from the US, so we'll get a perspective on that. Yeah. And then, Jamie, back to your background, pricing. You sort of alluded to earlier on some of the challenges Amrit had, one of your co-founders, when he started the business. But again, similar question to Richard, but what are the kind of challenges people have been coming to you with, and clearly you're helping them solve them in some way because you're building a business on the back of it?
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to my time, there were 2 pain points that really stung me and I spent many, many years dealing with. The first is around fragmented data, like just the inability to get hold of the data I need. So like I, as an actuary, like if I am doing my job well, I am helping underwriters to be more profitable. I need data to do that. I'm going to apply some analysis to that. I'm going to provide some insight. I'm going to get that to the underwriter, and hopefully I'm going to express it in a commercial way and not just chuck a piece of analysis over the fence. But that's another problem. I think it was Amy who was talking earlier about this idea of democratized data. This idea that everyone should be able to get access to your data, the key data that you need in order to steer your business. I think my entire experience in-house was probably the exact opposite, maybe dictatorship data. We had 5 different pricing tools, technologies. We had 7 different policy admin systems. You couldn't get data out of all of them, and it was an absolute mess. So I remember spending months and months and months of my life effectively trying to pull data from this PAS, join it to this pricing data, like bring that together, wrangle it, and I'd spend 8 months bringing data together to do 1 month of work of machine learning. To provide some insight. And that ratio is just completely wrong. And I think that's one of the things that insurers really need to grapple with, is we talk about fragmented landscapes and fragmented infrastructure, but that leads to fragmented data. And so what are we doing on the data side? I think the other thing that comes to mind is around deployment. So I would, going back to that analogy, I would spend 8 months on data, 1 or 2 months on analysis, do some change management, as Richard was saying, and effectively, you can never chuck a model over the fence to underwriters. You've got to sit down and live it and breathe it with them and get them used to it. And then I would effectively turn around to IT and be like, okay, we're ready to deploy. And they say, 6 months' time, we'll be able to implement 30% of the model you've built. Or, I've done this really exciting piece of analysis. I found out that, ESG data is predictive of loss in the MLC space or kind of management liability space.
Which, sorry, Jamie, I'm going to stop you because you've now used 3 acronyms.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And someone said to me the break.
Okay, what did I say?
So just quickly about past policy administration systems.
Yep.
I think most people will probably understand that. ESG, I'm assuming everyone in the audience does, but environmental, societal, governments. And then MLC, we're in the US now, so you're going to have to
Okay,
explain.
I'm just going to say management liability.
Okay.
So effectively management liability. And, you'd spend all of this time doing this analysis, realizing, hold on, we can get a real competitive advantage in the market if we can just bring in this ESG data and incorporate it into our technical price. And then suddenly realize we don't have the capacity to ingest external data into my underwriter workflow. So effectively, the only solution I've got is to go to the underwriter and say, can you please go and look that up manually and type it in and add to the problem that Richard was talking about on professional liability. I've got another external data source I need to go to manually.
And Richard mentioned in passing about not every underwriter wants to be augmented, which is sort of where we started this conversation. What's your view on that? Is it, and if they don't want to be augmented, is that because they don't understand the benefits augmentation can bring? They don't think they don't have confidence in them? What are you seeing?
I'm going to again draw upon my time in-house and then talk a little bit about some of the work we do with customers. But I would often get to the end of a piece of analysis, pass it to the underwriting team, or I would see people pass actuarial analysis to underwriters, and the underwriters just balk and say, I don't believe that, I'm going to walk away. And effectively, it's around commercializing the insights, commercializing that analysis, sitting down with your underwriting teams, helping them to understand what you've done, why you believe it. But I think we see a very similar thing in pricing and rating tool deployment as well at hyperexponential. Actuaries going away, hiding in a back room, building a pricing tool, chucking it over the fence just doesn't work. Because effectively, that's the actuary's rating tool, that's the actuary's pricing tool. It's not the underwriter's. Where it works really well is where we see actuaries actually sitting with underwriters. We always I think a lot of our customers think we're joking. We say, look, actually get your actuary to go and sit with your underwriters. Don't just get them to talk regularly, get them to go and sit alongside them, get them to understand what the needs are. And I think that really adds a lot of value.
Okay, so we are Brits talking to an American audience, and my next question's got a... No, I haven't told you what I'm going to ask you yet.
Okay.
It's got the word excited in it. What can we be excited about? So I think when we get excited, people probably just think we're just awake. So we're going to be talking about Gen AI. Which one of you wants to answer the question about what we can get excited about with generative AI?
Good.
And you've got to be excited, whoever answers it.
Got to be excited, right. So what I won't opine on is the general topic of AI, because I think that's been covered to some extent today. There's a number of experts in this room, and I think there's a session on it later. So we can talk to it in the space of pricing and how we work with clients, the conversations we're having in terms of how to unlock the value of that in the context of pricing and rating. So first of all, there was a question in the room around how can you eliminate tech debt. Definitely haven't got the solution for that. If someone says they do have the solution for that, either don't believe them or I would invest in them very quickly because they'll probably be retired in a year. But the first question that, particularly in the kind of the data and analytics and the pricing analytics space, is actually what structures do you want to put in place that means you can start to capture that data in a uniformed way? So what's your architecture requirements? What's your data infrastructure that you need? Once you've kind of answered that question, we saw on the slide earlier that there's a huge opportunity for AI being applied in general in insurance. Reportedly, insurance is the second biggest industry and fastest industry to adopt AI after technology industry, which is pretty epic and pretty awesome, actually. So there was some kind of disappointment from the earlier panel in terms of how that's actually come into fruition. But we've been one of the fastest moving industries to actually start playing with it, to run POCs. So I think I think that's kind of quite cool, and we should feel good about that. When we speak with our customers, one of the challenges they find is there's the business are pulling use cases from them. They're suggesting, I want to do this, I want to do that. And so our clients will often try and look at it in 3 different buckets. And so the first one in the world of pricing is actually how can they build and deploy their models much more quickly. So kind of to really redact that down, that's can you have a context-specific copilot, which will help you build and deploy those rating models really quickly. The context-specific bit is really, really important for anyone here who's in insurance, which is most people, if not everyone, because there are lots of nuances and interesting parts around insurance that you need to kind of engineer for. So if you don't think about that when you're training those models and building them, you can quickly build up a lot more tech debt. The second area is around ingestion and enriching, which I think we've covered a bit today. And then the last one, which is a bit more of the, if I was a product person, I'd say now, next, later. This is very much in the later space. But once you've built that data asset, how can you use that to be proactive? So some kind of POCs that we're running with customers at the moment is the idea of, can you query your data asset as an underwriter and say, like, how does this risk compare with other risks that I've written recently? And then actually through that, you can start to train a layer of prompts, like what are the prompts that underwriters care about, so you could proactively surface it up. So it's like, hey, you've got this risk, but if you look at that from a marginal portfolio perspective, it's you might want to look at it differently. So seeing it through kind of those three different lenses and like a whole plethora of use cases that I won't kind of opine on now, but yeah.
Pretty exciting.
Is that good?
That's
is that
good.
exciting?
Well, you can ask me.
Yeah,
I know. They're the ones you've got to excite, not me. Jamie, I just want to wrap up with a final question, or you can refer to a friend. Again, for the audience, what their takeaway, one bit of advice to help them move beyond the pains of the past.
Yeah, I think it was Nigel who said earlier that kind of the P&C transformation roadmap is often 7 years long, right? And
how long?
7 years.
And POC is proof of concept for those.
Oh, P&C, sorry.
P&C,
P&C
okay.
insurance. I think life insurance was 40 years or something like that. I think, yep, perfect. I got it right. Anyway, so I think I was surprised by that because when I was in-house, it always felt like it was 10 years, and it was a rolling 10 years. So it was always 10 years away. And it always felt like the aviation team, or there was one team who was always at the end of the 10-year roadmap. And you would go and sit and you would talk to them and you'd say, okay, what can we do to help you? We found this piece of technology. Can we bring it in? And you'd go to IT and they'd say, hold on, that's not on our 10-year roadmap. We can't bring that in now. And I think there's an element of, I'm not bashing 10-year roadmaps. We need transformation. There's legacy debt we need to get rid of. But a willingness to kind of look at agile solutions today that can solve my pain points and release value now, as opposed to always saying, okay, I'm going to have a transformation project that is 7 years, 8 years, 9 years long.
Great. Jamie, one of the things I enjoy talking about you is I get the sense that you are an actuary trapped in an insurance company and you've been let free to deliver the things you really want to be able to do, and you're so excited about your organization. It's great hearing that kind of enthusiasm. So we do have time for at least one question from the audience, maybe two. Okay, got one back over here. Got a microphone?
One of the, at least focus areas for a lot of carriers that I've seen is kind of trying to reduce this gap between what an actuary models versus finally what the underwriter does.
Yeah.
Like the actuarial costed ratio or the underwriting loss ratio.
Yep.
So I'm just curious for your perspective, do you think that is a KPI that really, like how much does that matter? And then secondly, in your work with clients, is that something that you try to close the gap on?
Great question. I think the gap does matter. I think, the way I think about it is that, the actuary is coming up with a prediction, the underwriter is kind of making a decision. I think we've got to be realistic, both as actuaries and as an industry, about how accurate those actuarial predictions are, especially on individual risks. Classically, I have so fond memories of pricing tools that were producing technical price or benchmarks that were just a bunch of fingers in the air. And then suddenly the business turns around and says, hold on a second, that individual account has got a price adequacy of less than 50%. It must be bad. And you think, hold on. So I think there's an element of we have to be realistic about how accurate those things are, and there should be a roadmap in place to improve the accuracy of employ data-driven analysis, employ AI and machine learning to kind of make those predictions more accurate. I think with the gap, I think there should be a gap to a certain extent. If there isn't a gap, then we are automating, not augmenting. Sometimes you can do that. It depends on the class of business, the product, how simple, we move into transactional underwriting. But where we're not doing that, there is a gap for a reason. And I think actually as actuaries, and just in insurance as a whole, the pricing tool, the rating tool, shouldn't just be all about what is the technical price, what's my benchmark price. We should be looking at the other insights you can give to the underwriter. So what external data can I ingest that's going to give them more insight and understanding? What portfolio benchmarks, what other kind of information can I put in front of the underwriter that's not going to say, stick to my technical price, that's the right thing. Instead say, I'm going to give you real insights that's then going to help you decide how best to move away from my technical price. So I'm not actually a fan of the idea of trying to close that at all costs. I think I'm a fan, and I think you should track it, and I think kind of, there's a risk that you just say, just ignore it. You should never ignore it. But understand its limitations and also empower underwriters to give them the additional insight to say, hold on, I know something about this risk that the technical price doesn't allow for.
Okay, Jamie, Richard, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Thank
Matthew.
you.